sort of talk through about how one takes a business architecture view, and if we get good business architecture, we're going to be able to build out a lot of these capabilities we've talked about so far. But I want to start with a question. The question is, do you know the difference between a methodologist and a terrorist? Anybody know that? Okay, here's the answer. You can negotiate with a terrorist. So I'm going to give you one point of view, which you might not totally agree with in some of it, but it's a way that we found you have to work this out. Because it's one thing to talk about all the things you need to have. It's something else to say, well, how am I going to do that and get that kind of information? So that's really where I'm going to start today. And I would contend that this diagram probably looks pretty familiar to all of us, conceptually at least, when we go in and do our work. Have you ever felt like that? That, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, I've got this huge set of things to do. I'm just afraid if I pull this wire out of here, I have no idea what's going to happen to the communication network of my entire corporation, or the whole country even. And so people are afraid to touch what's there, and so it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So really what we're trying to do here, a good business architecture, the goal of a good business architecture is going to ultimately identify non-redundant, meaning defined once, okay, reusable, which basically means it's applicable to many other places, resources to be able to execute the business strategy. So it's really all about delivering capabilities to the organization, but doing it in a way where we don't end up having all kinds of redundancy, all kinds of extra work, all kinds of inconsistencies, because maybe I've got 10 rules for anti-money laundering, but each part of the organization uses some but not all of them, and they have their own version as opposed to a shared single defined version. So that's really what I'm going to try to do with good business architecture. Will allow us to separate the stable from the dynamic. And there will be some things which are stable, some things last a lot longer than others. And certainly a lot of the models we build will go that way. And so I think a good business architecture also looks at more than one perspective. It's not just about business capabilities where I define all the things I have to build. And I think that personally, I believe is one of the flaws of a lot of the methods for business architecture today, where people go on and say, what are your capabilities? What are the sub-capabilities? And just basic, and then which ones are working well and not working well? And people then start to heat map their capabilities and implement things which are broken, but no one cares about. So it's only about building stuff as opposed to connecting to strategy and making sure we know whatever we've built, where is it going to be used in our business processes? And by the way, one of the ways we talk about business processes and value chains and value streams and so on is we just ask the question, what work do you do and how do you do that? How do you do that work? It's about work. So even though sometimes you may not want to use the process word, but you can always ask about work. Because either human or a technology or some sort of physical device is doing work. And we might move the actor on that and so on. But then based upon what we need versus what we have, we can then ask the questions, what is my investment strategy? Where should I put my scarcest resource? Which is money, but scarcer is smart people. So I only have so much of that. So to me, business architecture should cover all these different perspectives so we can work it that way. By the way, have you ever noticed that when you're doing this stuff, you start pointing at the wall when the computer's over there? So it's very strange thing to do. Anyway, so again, when a lot of people now are talking about things like business models, operating models, and strategies, really, I think we need to bring it all together. So what value are we going to create? What outputs will we deliver, and how will we coordinate all of that? How will we actually execute the work we're doing? And how do we actually build out the resources we need in order to put that in place? By the way, most of the money is spent down here in terms of change, right? It's really quite interesting. We do all this down here. We don't do this, but because we haven't done this, make the wrong decisions down here. So methodologically, I think it's very, very important we do that earlier, as John would call it, we do the engineering work as opposed to we focus on the actual manufacturing work. So that's going to be important to us, I think. So we actually have an approach. This is our method for doing this. Hopefully it's just a logical set of things that we really need to do. From the strategic context to the business design, to the actual implementation of the change, and actually the execution of the business operations. All of this has to come together. So in our view, business architecture is not just one piece of this, it's sort of how all those dots connect up, and so they're logically connected. The first set of things we'll look at is, where are we with our business ecosystem? And I showed that steeple chart earlier. That's part of the business ecosystem. Defining stakeholder requirements. Simple question. Who cares? What do they care about? What's important? And then, by the way, you're going to have to balance that off, because you're going to get different perspectives from different stakeholder groups, which will be in conflict with each other. So we have to basically figure all that out. So what's driving us that we have no control over? What is our strategic intent? So strategic intent is not strategy. A strategic goal is not a strategy. And I'll give you an example. We have worked quite a bit with a company called Mars. You know Mars? Chocolates.
No.
Okay. By the way, Mars is also the largest pet food company in the world. They make more money in pet food than they do in chocolate. It's very, very interesting. So a number of years ago, when we started to help them on this, corporate office in the US came out and said to every country, we want you, over the next 5 years, to increase your market share. To basically grow each category by 15% per year, compounded over 5 years. That means double your business volume in 5 years. By the way, the market is naturally growing at 2% per year. Oh, and by the way, we want 20% return on net assets, and we want you to generate 4% cash as well at the same time. Okay, good luck, everybody. But that is not a strategy. Somebody once said, hope is not a strategy. And by the way, if you say it more often, and you say it to a lot of different people, and you say it louder, doesn't make it any more implementable. So that's a tough issue. So basically what we did, we looked at all that and so hang on a second now, what's our North Star? In other words, how will we be able to simplify all this stuff into some sort of set of criteria where we know we've done well? So we looked at all the stakeholders, bounced off all the requirements and did that. And then we also defined strategic requirements. Now this is really important. This is where the strategy comes into it. Now over here, if you have to grow at 15% per year, 2% natural growth markets, there are going to be strategies that have to come out of that. How will we do it is the strategy part. So in their particular case, they decided that being better at manufacturing was not going to give them that growth. Pretty strict. They're already good, really, really good at manufacturing. What they have to do, bring new products to market faster, new market categories, and acquire capacity, meaning acquire competition. And so one of the things that came out of this, based upon that strategy, Mars acquired Wrigley, the gum company. The $7 billion acquisition, they bought a whole bunch of market share as a result of all of that, and so they actually executed on the strategy. Now, we were quite involved in doing all this. We could have just jumped into architecture and done process maps and capability diagrams and information flows and all that kind of stuff, but that would not help us realize a non-defined strategy. So that became quite important. Now, out of all of that, we then said, well, what are the things we're going to have to deal with? I have to deal with my processes. I have to do the work in a better way. I have to basically build out capabilities, including technological, human, and collaborating company strategies. I have to measure the work I'm doing, and I actually have to define my business information. By the way, notice all of these are sort of circular. Like you do a bit of one, it feeds off the other, and you iterate it and so on going forward. So basically then, that will define all the things we're going to have to spend our money on. But we have a set of models in all of them. Okay? Now, based upon what's happening here and what's needed here, we will then go here and say, now, what are your change priorities? So, and then those change priorities are going to be very much focused upon what's strategically important and what's not working well. the combination. Not only what's not working well, it has to be strategically value added as well. Now I can basically look at my resource requirements, I can basically build my change roadmap, and actually do the resource transformation. And then after that, I can now look at how I'll actually manage differently. And Mars in Canada, where we work with them, we also work with Brazil, but in Canada, we actually changed the reporting relationship, the organization chart. The org chart was redone based upon the value chain and the requirements. It was not the other way around, okay? So we try to optimize that. And put in place proper continuous improvement, sustainability. Really, agility gives you sustainability. That's what we're going for. And of course, after that, we all live happily ever afterwards, and everything is great. But 5 years afterwards, they had beat the targets. So it was really, really good to see those kind of results. And today, we're actually working with them still today to actually integrate the operations of Wrigley with the operations of Mars, because they could not operate them together because there was earnouts and all kinds of financial requirements why they couldn't do it right away. So they're continuing on that journey. So, and they're just following this logical methods. Each one of these things here is just something you have to build at some point in time. And if you can just sort of handle this more straightforward that way. Now, in doing all of this, especially doing the strategy work, one of the critical things is know your North Star and know your external challenges and pressures and constraints. Then take an old approach, it's called business scenario analysis, and say, what do we expect? That's a crystal ball down the middle. What happens if we get more opportunity, like the crystal ball at the top? What happens if it's not as good as we hoped? Are we flexible enough, or are we agile enough as a business to be able to scale up and handle that kind of situation? One of the things that happened at Mars in Canada, they developed a new cat treat, which they were the only factory to be able to do it, and they're running 3 shifts a day, full out, and the marketplace demand is up through the roof. But they can't meet the requirements in the marketplace. They're leaving money on the table because they did not think of, at the time they didn't think about what happens when things go well. And quite often what we find is there's more risk when things are better than you think they're going to be than there is when things are worse than what they're going to be. Because everyone's not going to turn down the opportunity, right? So that's a big challenge. And then, so based upon these business scenarios, and take what you think is going to happen and scale it up, bring it down, say, will our solutions work for better, more, less, worse? And so therefore, are we agile enough as a business to be able to move our models around, move our operations around to be able to do that? So now I can say, do I have the strength to handle various situations? Do I have the weakness? Do I have weaknesses I have to shore up to deal with opportunities and threats and so on? This is really quite important. And quite often we don't do this because we've got stuff to build. We've got to get to it more quickly. So this is just reinforcing what Ron said. In all the business architecture work, the first thing we do is a concept model. A model of things like, I've got to deal with regulations and orders and customers and partners and how do these things actually work with each other. And what the reason we do it for business architecture, in addition to being an excellent vehicle to help us with the business rules, it also helps me with performance. I can count how many orders went straight through without manual intervention. So just counts of things are the basis for all measurement. So I can measure, this tells me what to measure. My business processes have to deal with orders, they have to deal with regulations, they have to deal with establishing partner relationships. I build my processes around the concepts as well. And I can build my capabilities out. So I can define capabilities around the same concepts and business information. Ron would say, you know, sitting right here, I can talk about him. Ron would say the concept model is not an information model, but it's a really good place to start. Is that fair, Ron? Okay, good. You see, I do this as in eating a banana, so you can't just. So it's a really, really good place to start because what we find is all the other models happen much more quickly because we've defined the words, we've defined the semantics. Everybody's talking about the same kind of thing when we get to the other models as well. So it's quite helpful for that. One of the important things about these models, this is just an illustration of that, is
if I have my process architecture and I have my capability map, I should be able to say, you know what, if I've got a problem with this process, then maybe it's this capability and this capability that's causing that. Okay, let me fix this capability for that. Well, hang on a second, if I fix it for that, I should also know that it's also used here, here, and here. So if I fix it for one, I might mess it up for everybody else unless I look at all the implications that are taking place. So if I don't have the knowledge of the concept that I'm dealing with, or the subject matter I'm dealing with, if I don't have that, I'm in trouble. I need to know how the processes work together and how the capabilities relate to each other. But more important is how are they connected? Which business rules are used by which processes? And there, I'm going to probably get to that by looking at what decisions are made in which processes and what rules are required for those decisions. I need to be able to trace those things. I need to be able to go, if I touch this, showing all the other things that might be impacted. So at least I can avoid scrap and rework because I thought through designing it properly in the first place. Now, with regard to all this, there's measurement. I mean, this is an important part of business architecture, I believe, because then you get the feedback loop coming in. And this is sort of a more modern balanced scorecard. Are we effective with the customer? Are we efficiently using our resources? Do we have consistent quality? Consistency Ron talked about. And also, how easy is it going to be to make that change? So I'm going to measure, agility measures be things like time to market. Basically, how easily can I get a decision made about an investment? That type of thing. And Ron also talked about something where we talked about the issue of the constraint of your existing software release cycle. We had this in the Mars example I'm just using here. When we were doing the work in Brazil, there was a whole bunch of stuff we couldn't implement because the SAP release cycle was not till next February, and we were sitting in May, and they only did it once a year. Right? That's not what you want. I want to be able to change that business rule today by a business person and have it executing tomorrow. And I don't want to have to go to IT to get that done. Because I've separated the rules from the process, and there's no rules embedded in code. Does that make sense? They're basically articulated that way. Now, if I can do my measurement this way, I can actually have a hierarchy of measures. But the hierarchy of measures is exactly the same structure as your process decomposition. And if you do it this way, you don't have to basically then go in and do a separate project for measurement than process. It's the same structure. You have to find the measures for each level, but basically my processes, which are extremely stable at the architecture level, like sign up new customer, does not say how do I do it. I don't care if I do it through a digital process or a manual process or an in-branch process. Basically, sign up new customers has the same KPI, it'll last a long, long time. How I implement it will be different, but from a business management point of view, I've got the same KPIs, I've got the same activities, they last a long, long time. That's the separation of the stable from the variable. Now, I talked before about prioritization. If each one of these is a business process, process number 9, what that's telling me is this process is extremely important. In other words, the processes over here best hit the North Star requirements. Whereas process number 8 doesn't really do much. It's really badly broken, but if I put all my money in 8 versus putting all my money in 9, I'm not going to get the business value I'm looking for. This is a really, really nice heat map to work through. So we call this the gain, and we call this the pain. The other thing that's important here is this is the stuff that will differentiate you in the market. This is the stuff where you have to have it, but being the best doesn't matter. So this is a problem when you do ERP implementation. We always see that people go out and they do all these interviews, and as a result of those interviews, they come back with world-class requirements for things where you just have to be normal. And you end up spending lots and lots of money and extra time customizing your ERP, which you just take what the ERP does for you there. Customize this stuff, not this stuff. Okay? But so here we combine strategy and capability and process, and put the pain gain chart out there. And it's really quite helpful with regard to that. This is a hexagon that we use to sort of figure out what changes we have to make. We'll say, okay, business performance is what's critical. We have processes and information which will enable that to happen. But we have to question, do we have the right strategy? Policies and rules? Do they need to change? Because what we can find here is the actual process is quite often okay. It's other stuff around it which is not where we need to be. Decisions, policies, rules. Humans, are they competent? Are they motivated? Do they have a capacity issue? It might be, I don't have enough people. Technology, facilities, locations. Am I going to outsource something? Organizational structure. These are all considerations when you want to make an improvement with regard to your business process. And of course, there's another ring in here, which I can be perfect in all of this, but if my culture is wrong, all the good stuff gets filtered out and people go back and do what they want to do anyway. So the behavioral aspect needs to be considered when we're looking at making all this kind of stuff happen. We want to build up flexibility. So just to get into the closing point here, freedom within a framework is an expression we use quite a bit. You can't be absolute about all of this. You have to be flexible enough to have it all make sense. This is a quote from Erich Fromm, who survived until 1980. He said, true freedom is not the absence of structure. By the way, he said this in about 1935. I think I was attributed back to that. True freedom is not the absence of structure, letting employees go off and do whatever they want. Some people are afraid when we do this, you let people do something that really makes sense, that you're going to lose control. You give them a structure. So basically it says, rather, it's a clear structure that enables people to work within established boundaries in an autonomous and creative way. And I think what we're talking about is very much that. Get this thing stable, which are stable, have that defined, allow people to be creative within all that and innovative within that environment. Now, so, my last slide. You're saying, what the heck is this? A couple of years ago, we had an artist, a Dutch artist, interpret what we were saying into a diagram, which we then now have to explain to people. But anyway, what it really says is, we need to be observing and monitoring and seeing everything that's taking place. But here's our poor executives today. They're looking at what's happening in the world. They're getting all these confusion and requirements from the marketplace and their own employees. They've got broken capabilities. None of the processes work, and the architects don't know how to fix it. Right? So, other than that, it's a great world. So then, but looking at that, then a series of ideas comes out, and a series of plans might come out of this. But then each one of these plans might just be what we, in Agile, you would call sprint. But we can do sort of business transformation sprints, get something done, build some stuff out, and then gradually keep working towards it. So you don't have to be here on day one. You have to keep your eye on that mark, but basically building things out over a series of time. Some sprints will be smaller, some will be bigger, and we should be measuring those things all the way through. So this is really all we're trying to do, is sort of have it all connect up and have it all make sense. Okay, that's me.